So as you guys know, this class all builds on itself. I've talked about that a lot over the course of this year so far. Um, and we're kind of at the point where you have, whether you know it or not, a basic level understanding of basically everything, which is awesome. Um, I want to kind of go more in depth on a few of the things that we've already covered, but you probably still have some questions about because we haven't covered it in its entirety. So we are going to go on a vocabulary marathon, which I know you're very excited about. Hopefully, you already downloaded the um, little document there on Edgenuity that has all those terms for you to fill out. We are going to go through one by one. We're going to talk about each of these terms, why it matters, all that good stuff. Because every single one of those terms is completely fair game for the AP test. So let's get started, right? And obviously, very vocab heavy. Make sure you take notes. So, starting out, we're going to talk about the theories of democracy. So, after reading the Federalist Papers so far, you've probably gathered that America is not a democracy. In fact, it is a democratic republic. Another word for that would be a representative republic. So instead of us, directly voting on all of our laws and, having majority win, right, majority rule, instead, we elect representatives who then vote on our behalf. So the question is, what role does democracy actually have in a democratic republic? And there are three theories as to how democracy should or does work in a democratic republic, and we're going to go over all three of those. So the first one is direct democracy, and throughout this entire PowerPoint, all of the definitions are going to be in italics. So where you see up at the top how the letters are kind of slanted, that means that's going to be your definition. That is what I need you to write down. So a direct democracy means that citizens should directly have a say in laws. That one's pretty easy to remember because direct is in the name of the term, right? And also the definition. And that occurs in two different ways. So on your note sheet, you're going to see on there that you have initiatives and you have referendums. So we have the definition for those as well. So an initiative is when citizens collect signatures and put a proposed law on a statewide ballot. So let's say you wanted to, legalize marijuana. Each state has a set number of signatures that are needed for a group of citizens to put an initiative on the ballot. So you would collect signatures from registered voters in the state based on its requirements, and you would submit that to the state legislature through the proper channels. And in the next election, all of the citizens of the state would get to vote on that initiative. So initiatives are basically laws that are created by citizens. So that's why it's an example of direct democracy. Referendums are also an example of direct democracy. Referendums are when the state legislature asks citizens to vote on a law. Usually that's when the law is fairly controversial and maybe they don't want on their personal voting record to show how they feel about a certain issue. So instead, they will ask the citizens to vote on that proposal. And in Arkansas, we just had this with the casinos, the legalization of casinos and the building of, I believe, 4 of them in various parts of the state. That was a referendum. And the people of Arkansas voted and they said, yes, we want a casino. And now we have a lovely casino here in Pine Bluff. All right, moving on. So we just did direct democracy, right? And then we also covered 2 more terms, initiatives and referendums. We're going to move on to pluralist theory of democracy. That is the second of 3 theories. So the definition of pluralist theory is interest groups should compete amongst one another to influence policy. And the interest groups that have the best ideas, or maybe they have ideas that other interest groups also agree with, whatever the case may be, interest groups should basically dictate how policy works. So that way people are, still shaping the way that the government works, but they're doing it via factions. So pluralist theory democracy is basically exactly what James Madison advocated for in Federalist 10, right? Because we have liberty, we have the ability to make opinions and voice our opinions, and it's natural that we're going to join up with people that have the same opinions as us. So that's how factions work, right? And pluralist theory democracy is basically saying factions should rule the world. So basically, the ideas that interest groups come up with, they're all given to the representatives in either Washington, D.C. or Little Rock or wherever. They would present these ideas, usually in the form of data, right? Because if you remember, right, in the number one activity of interest groups is lobbying, and lobbying is giving data to legislators to try and sway their opinion and write a law in your favor. So all these guys will be giving data and oral arguments to the representatives. The representatives will hear arguments from all kinds of sides, right? When it comes to interest groups, there's not just going to be two sides, there's going to be like 40. They're going to hear all these different opinions, they're going to consult with experts, and they're going to produce a compromise. And the theory behind pluralist democracy is that this compromise that is created by these representatives is going to be the best possible law for the common good. It's going to be informed by data, and it's also going to please the most people. So an example of that, interest groups play a huge role in elections. So interest groups have donated billions of dollars in every presidential election in recent memory, but especially in the 2020 election cycle. They donate to candidates so that candidates who agree with the goals of the interest group can get into office, and then they would pass favorable laws to that interest group. So for example, if Moms Demand Action, which is an interest group that is focused on trying to prevent school shootings, if they bankroll a candidate and that candidate gets into office, that candidate is probably going to try and pass laws that would limit the sale of assault rifles, which is something that the interest group wants to happen. And again, this is not necessarily a bribe, it's more so that the interest group is trying to get people that already agree with them, right? They're not necessarily trying to change someone's mind when they're donating to their campaign. They're trying to get people who already agree with them elected. And like I kind of already said, interest groups also, in addition to trying to influence elections, they also rely on lobbying and litigation to convince legislators, or the courts, if a litigation is the route they choose to take, to aid their cause. So pluralist theory is all about interest groups, and interest groups, right, are factions. So when you think Fed 10, think factions and think pluralist theory democracy. So we've already got, right, direct democracy, which is where people directly create and vote on laws. Pluralist theory is where you have factions in the form of interest groups who basically dictate how laws operate. And here is some data to kind of show you how this actually worked out in the 2020 election. Remember that the candidate who raises the most money almost always wins. I think the figure is somewhere around 85% of the time they win. And if you look at the amount of money that was spent, Joe Biden and the Democrats had quite a lot of money donated to them. The number 2 through 8 sectors of interest groups all donated primarily to Democrats, whereas the Republicans, as you can see, did not raise as much money from interest groups. And the Democrats won the election pretty handily. They took the presidency and the Senate from the Republicans. So elite theory would kind of counter pluralist theory of democracy. If you were thinking to yourself that you really don't buy that Fed 10 makes a good argument, you don't buy that interest groups facilitating compromise is the way to run government, then maybe you are in the camp of the elite theory democracy folks. So elite theory democracy is the theory that those who have the most money and the most power in our society control our politics. So basically, no matter what anybody says, it's the powerful people that control everything. And no amount of interest groups or no amount of good ideas can really overpower the people who have all of this wealth and this control and this giant platform, right? So that's the theory, at least. So it conflicts with pluralist theory because it argues that interest groups really can't, even be on the same playing field as people that have just this incredible amount of money. Here's some examples that are actually in our government. So these are codified examples of how this works. So one example would be franking, which is one of your terms, obviously, because it's underlined. Franking is kind of crazy, actually. So members of Congress do not actually have to pay for postage, which I know, you might think, well, stamps aren't that expensive, and you're not wrong. But if you're running for office and you need to mail like 10 different things to every single person in your district, especially if you're running like statewide, right? Imagine mailing multiple things to everyone in the entire state. Paying for all those stamps is actually quite expensive. And franking saves them a ton of money. So members of Congress can actually substitute their signature for a postage stamp, which is kind of crazy. So that is a way where the powerful get to stay in power, right? And continue to control how things go. You try and take away their power, probably not going to win because the people who are in power are going to stay there. That's kind of part of elite theory, right? Another aspect of elite theory is the bully pulpit, which is another term on your sheet. The bully pulpit essentially means that the people with a large platform have a larger sway over the public. It's actually kind of logical, but in this class, this theory applies specifically really to the president. When the president speaks, it becomes national news, right? If, for example, President Biden is going to hold a press conference to kind of talk about what he thinks, everybody is going to film that. And the people of America, even if they don't watch it directly, are going to hear about it on social media, or if you're an old person, you could read it in the newspaper. Whatever the case may be, when the president says something, people listen. And when I say something, very few people listen. So, they have a larger platform than me. So they have a larger sway over how people think. That's how the bully pulpit works. So the larger your platform, the more power you have to influence the way that people view a given situation. If you think about the storming of the Capitol, honestly, President Trump was kind of impeached over the theory of bully pulpit. They're saying, dude, you're tweeting and, millions and millions and millions of people are seeing these tweets and you're encouraging them to go to the Capitol. And then you're holding a, speech at this rally that is nationally televised. And, it's on CNN, ABC, everywhere. And, you're telling these people that you gotta, stand strong and fight for what you believe in. And, people took that literally and they went into the Capitol and they put pipe bombs everywhere and stuff. So The impeachment that just happened is a great example of the bully pulpit. They're saying, if you have this large platform, you have to use it wisely. So the question really is, instead of televised addresses, because not that many people watch them, is Twitter the new bully pulpit? That's a good question. These are the top. I put 16 in there just so it would fit on the slide, but really, top 15 are the ones that matter because Twitter is Twitter. These are the amount of followers that the top 15 people have on Twitter, and it's calculated in millions. So if you look at Barack Obama, for example, he has 129 million followers. If he tweets something out, a bunch of people are going to read it, and a fair amount of them are going to believe whatever he says. So that's a ton of sway. If I say something, at maximum, like 3 people listen to it. So this is pretty crazy that, he has the power to sway hundreds of millions of people. Justin Bieber as well. Imagine if Justin Bieber became a very political person. He would have a ton of sway over, especially like really younger female folks or, people my generation who kind of grew up with him before he went off the rails a little bit. He'd have a ton of sway over a lot of people. Taylor Swift, I feel like, is fairly political. A lot of people listen to what she has to say. Same thing with Lady Gaga. If you look at number 15, CNN, breaking news, has 60 million followers. Imagine if CNN makes an opinion piece on something that's going on, right? They have a lot of power to sway the way that people think. So a lot of talking by me simply just to illustrate that elite theory is the theory that the larger the platform you have, the more sway you have over people. And this relates to elite theory because the elite theory is saying, right, that the people in power control everything. And interest groups or individual people, just the average person, right, they can't do much because the people with money and the people with power dictate everything. The bully pulpit is an example of that because so many people are influenced by these powerful and these wealthy individuals. And all of those guys have opinions of their own. So we're going to take a break for right now. So do me a favor, and all of the things you just filled out, so from America's form of government, the 2 terms for that, all the way through bully pulpit, download this document in its current form with those 8 terms, upload it to Edgenuity, and then we will come back and we will go over even more things about federalism, which I know you're very excited about. So I will catch you guys in a minute.